Snow slammed against the cabin walls like fists. Inside, 81-year-old Martha Clark pressed her shoulder against the door, trying to keep it from bursting open. The wind howled through every crack, carrying a sound that didn't belong, a low, guttural moan that rose above the blizzard. She froze. It wasn't the wind. Something was out there. The moan came again, closer this time, a mix of pain and anger, raw and heavy, cutting through the storm like a dying engine. She grabbed her flashlight and pointed it toward the window. Nothing but white. Then movement, a shadow shifting behind the snow, massive, crawling. Martha's heart pounded. For a moment she thought her mind was playing tricks on her. She hadn't seen another living soul in days. But then the shape stumbled closer, collapsing against her fence with a crash that made the cabin shake. She raised the light again. What she saw didn't make sense. A polar bear, huge, bleeding, and barely standing. Its fur was streaked with red, one leg dragging uselessly through the snow. The animal lifted its head, eyes clouded with exhaustion. Not rage, not threat, just pain. For one breathless moment, their eyes met through the glass. Martha couldn't move. The wind roared, snow swirling around that broken creature like a burial shroud. Her mind screamed one word, danger, but her heart whispered another, help. The bear let out a sound, not a growl, more like a cry. Then it collapsed again, body half buried in the snowdrift near her porch. Martha stumbled back from the window. Her rational side shouted at her to stay inside. She was old, alone, fragile. That thing could kill her with one swipe. But there was something in the way it had looked at her, desperate, almost pleading. She reached for her coat. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely pull the zipper up. When she opened the door, the wind hit her like knives. She squinted against the whiteout, her flashlight beam cutting a thin path through the storm. The bear lay motionless now, its breath slow and uneven. The smell of iron, blood, hung in the air. Easy, she whispered, voice trembling as if the animal could understand. She stepped closer, one cautious foot at a time. The bear's paw twitched. A low rumble escaped its throat. Not a threat, just effort. Martha noticed something half buried beneath the snow near its side. She knelt, brushed the ice away and gasped. A cub. Tiny, motionless, pressed against its mother's bleeding body. Martha's breath caught in her chest. The cub moved weakly, letting out a faint, broken sound, the same she had heard through the storm. It wasn't the mother who'd cried first, it was the baby. The realization hit her like a punch. The mother had dragged herself here, through the blizzard, trying to find shelter for her cub. And she'd stopped at Martha's cabin, the only light left burning for miles. The wind screamed again, covering everything in white. Martha knelt there, the beam of her flashlight trembling across fur and snow and blood. She looked at the cub, then at the mother, breathing shallowly, each exhale slower than the last. "Don't you dare die on me," she whispered. "Not yet." The bear's eye flickered open, fixing on her. Just once. And in that single look, Martha felt something wordless pass between them. A kind of trust, fragile but real. She didn't know what to do next, but she knew she couldn't leave them out there. And as she turned back toward her cabin, ready to make an impossible choice, the wind carried another sound, distant, deep, echoing through the tundra. Another roar. Something was coming. Martha slammed the door shut behind her, snow blowing into the cabin like ghosts. Her heart wouldn't slow down. The image of that cub, half buried in red snow, wouldn't leave her mind. She pressed her back to the door and whispered, "Oh God, what am I supposed to do?" The radio on the counter hissed with static. Dead for days. The phone line was still down. No one was coming. The nearest outpost was 30 miles away, and the blizzard had erased every trace of the trail. She looked around her cabin, one kerosene lamp, a wood stove burning low, 2 blankets, a small box of medical supplies, and now outside, a dying bear and her cub. Martha shuffled to the window. The storm was so thick now she could barely see beyond her porch, but she could still make out the faint shape. The bear's body slumped, unmoving, a mound of snow already forming over her. Something in Martha twisted. She'd buried a husband, 2 brothers, and a lifetime of memories out here in the cold. But this felt different. This was life still fighting, clawing, refusing to give up. She grabbed the blanket from her bed and wrapped it tight around her shoulders. Then she took her old snow shovel and stepped back outside. The wind hit like a wall. She pushed forward, one slow step at a time, until she reached the bear again. The cub was still there, trembling weakly against its mother's fur. "It's okay," she whispered, voice barely a breath. "I'm not here to hurt you." She used the shovel to clear the snow from around them. The mother bear didn't move. Blood had frozen around her front paw, the wound deep, maybe a trap, maybe a fight. The cub tried to nuzzle closer, pressing into her fur for warmth. Martha reached out her mittened hand, hesitated, then gently lifted the cub. It weighed almost nothing, a trembling bundle of bone and fluff. It whimpered once but didn't struggle. She held it close against her chest, feeling the fragile heartbeat thump against her own. The mother's eyes fluttered open again, weak but aware. Martha pointed to the cub. "I'll bring it back," she said softly. "I promise." The bear's breath steamed in the cold, shallow and uneven. Then its head sank again into the snow. Martha turned and stumbled back toward the cabin, clutching the cub tight. Once inside, she slammed the door, dropped to her knees near the stove and unwrapped the tiny creature from her coat. It was shivering uncontrollably. She rubbed it gently with the blanket, whispering nonsense, the kind of words she used to speak to her dog decades ago. "Come on, little one, stay with me." She poured a bit of warm milk from the pan, dipped her finger, and touched it to the cub's mouth. It tried to lick weakly, then managed a faint suckle. A sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. For the first time in days, the cabin didn't feel empty. But the relief lasted only a moment. Through the window, a sound broke the rhythm of the storm, a low, distant rumble. It wasn't thunder, it was deeper, slower. Martha's stomach tightened. Another bear, maybe the father, maybe worse. She looked back at the cub in her arms, small, helpless, unaware of the danger circling outside. The wind moaned again, and under it she heard the faintest scraping sound, like claws against wood. The door shuddered. Martha's eyes went wide. She placed the cub in a basket near the stove and grabbed the rifle from above the mantel. Her hands shook so much she could barely load it. Another thud. The doorframe creaked. The sound wasn't coming from the front anymore. It was at the side of the cabin. Heavy footsteps circling, crunching snow. She raised the flashlight and aimed it through the frosted window. The beam caught a massive shape moving in the white, bigger than the mother, shoulders broad, fur silvered by frost. The head lifted, nostrils flaring, the male, searching. Martha turned the lamp off. Darkness swallowed the room. She crouched by the cub, whispering, "Shh, shh, stay quiet now." For a minute, there was only the sound of the wind and her own heartbeat. Then came the deep growl, low, angry, possessive. It echoed across the ice like thunder. She thought of the mother outside, bleeding, defenseless, and of what the male might do if he found her. Polar bears weren't gentle. The weak didn't survive long in the Arctic night. Martha's breath came in shallow bursts. She wanted to protect the cub, but something inside her screamed to go back out there. The mother was still alive, maybe minutes away from death, maybe already gone. The male roared again, closer this time, and that's when she made her choice. She grabbed the kerosene lantern, wrapped herself in a thicker coat, and took the rifle in one hand. Before stepping outside, she looked once more at the cub, asleep now, chest rising slowly in the basket. "Hold on, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm not done yet." The storm swallowed her instantly. Snow whipped at her face as she moved toward the faint shadow by the porch, the mother bear half covered in ice. The male was somewhere to her right, growling, pacing. Martha raised the lantern, waving it, shouting into the wind. "Over here, you hear me, over here!" The growl shifted, a massive silhouette turning toward the light. For one terrible second, she thought she'd doomed herself. The bear started moving in her direction, fast, but then another sound, a weak moan from the snow. The mother bear lifted her head barely. The male stopped, hesitated. He sniffed the air, recognizing her scent. He gave a short, guttural noise, a warning, then turned and vanished into the white. Silence fell again, thick and heavy. Martha dropped to her knees beside the mother. "You scared him off," she said softly. Good girl. The bear's eyes half closed, the faintest sound leaving her throat. Martha reached for the wound on the paw. It was bad. Metal caught in the flesh. A rusted snare, maybe from an abandoned trap. She worked carefully, hands trembling, until the steel finally came loose. When it did, blood welled fresh, steaming in the cold. Martha tore her scarf and pressed it against the wound, whispering, "Stay with me. Your baby's safe, just hold on." The bear's breathing slowed. One last shiver passed through her massive body. Then Martha leaned closer, pressing her hand to the fur. Nothing. Her throat closed. She stayed there, kneeling in the snow, the storm swallowing the world around her. For a long time, she didn't move. Finally, she whispered, "I'm sorry." And then, a faint sound. Not from the cub, not from the wind. From beneath the mother's body, a soft rustle like something buried alive trying to breathe. Martha froze. She reached under, fingers brushing against something warm. Another cub, smaller, still breathing. She gasped. Two. There were two. The smaller cub barely moved. Martha brushed away the snow, her fingers burning from the cold. Its fur was stiff with ice, its body limp, eyes sealed shut. She slipped it into her coat, pressing it against her chest, feeling for any sign of warmth. Nothing at first. Then, faintly, a twitch. A heartbeat. "Good," she whispered, voice cracking. "You're not gone yet." The mother lay still beside her, half buried now, a white mound against the storm. The world was silent except for the wind and Martha's ragged breathing. She wanted to say something, a prayer, a thank you, anything. But no words came, only the sound of the storm swallowing everything. She turned back toward the cabin, barely able to see the light through the snow. Her legs ached, lungs burning, arms clutching both cubs against her chest as if they were the only warmth left in the world. By the time she reached the door, her hands were numb. She kicked it shut behind her, stumbled to the stove and dropped to her knees. Both cubs were still alive, barely. The smaller one was colder than ice, its breathing shallow and fast. She grabbed the blanket, wrapped them both together and held them close to the stove. Then she fed the fire until the metal crackled and the air turned thick and hot. The cabin filled with the smell of wet fur and smoke. Martha sat there for hours, whispering to them. Nothing coherent, just sounds of comfort like a lullaby she didn't know she still remembered. When the bigger cub finally opened its eyes, it looked straight at her. No fear, just confusion, and a tiny, desperate will to live. She smiled through tears. "That's it, you're safe now." It was a lie, of course. Nothing about this place was safe. The storm howled outside like something alive, and the temperature kept dropping. She knew the male might come back searching, and if he did, one flimsy wooden cabin wouldn't stop him. But for now, they had warmth. They had breath. She gave them a few drops of milk, watched them press together under the blanket, tiny bodies shivering less and less. The smaller one whimpered once, a soft squeak that made her chest tighten. "You sound like my old boy," she murmured. "He used to make that sound when he was scared of thunder." Her voice broke on the word boy. It had been 20 years since her son died in that car accident. 20 years since the night she stopped believing she could protect anything again. Now, two orphaned creatures were curled in her lap, trusting her without question. It felt like forgiveness. Hours passed. The storm didn't let up. Martha fed the stove again, rationing her wood, calculating silently how long the fuel would last. Maybe another night, maybe less. At one point, she thought she heard movement outside, a crunch of snow, slow and heavy. She froze, rifle in hand, eyes locked on the window. Nothing, just the storm. Or maybe something too patient to be seen. The cubs stirred, and she forced herself to breathe again. She couldn't sleep. She sat there through the night, talking softly to the fire, to herself, to the ghosts of her past. The smaller cub's breathing grew stronger. The bigger one started to explore the blanket, clumsy paws slipping on the wooden floor. When dawn finally came, a dull grey light filtering through the frost, Martha stood and looked outside. The storm had eased. Everything was white and still. She wrapped herself in her coat again, opened the door, and stepped out. The cold hit like glass on her skin, but the world was quiet. No movement, no tracks, except the ones leading to the mother's body. The snow had begun to cover her completely. Martha knelt beside her again, brushing the frost away from the bear's face. The eyes were closed, peaceful. A faint halo of ice sparkled on her fur. "You did good," Martha whispered. "You got them here." Her own breath clouded the air, curling around the silence. She placed her hand on the bear's side, not to check for life this time, but to promise something wordless. Then she looked up. In the distance, beyond the ridge, she saw movement, a dark shape against the pale horizon. Big, slow, watching. The male. He was far, too far to reach her yet, but he was there, scenting the air, searching. She knew what he wanted. He'd find the mother soon, maybe the cub's scent next. And if he followed it, Martha backed away slowly, her heart pounding. She returned to the cabin, barred the door, and stared at the cubs sleeping near the stove. She knew what she had to do. The small fishing shed behind her cabin had thick walls, metal lock, and no windows, safer than the main cabin if the bear came close. She could move the cubs there, wait out the storm, maybe survive long enough for help to arrive. It was madness, but it was a plan. She bundled the cubs into an old duffel bag lined with blankets, careful not to scare them. They made soft, confused noises, their warmth seeping through the fabric like a heartbeat. Then she took her rifle, her lantern, and stepped outside again. The wind had died, but the cold had teeth. She moved quickly, boots crunching over ice, eyes scanning the white emptiness. The shed stood 30 yards away, close but exposed. Halfway there, a sound cut through the silence, a crack, snow shifting behind her. She turned. The male was closer now, moving through the drift like a ghost. Massive shoulders rolling under his fur, eyes fixed on her. He'd found the scent. Martha froze. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The cubs whimpered inside the bag, and the bear's head snapped toward the sound. "Shh," she whispered. "Please, not now." The bear roared, deep, furious, echoing across the ice. She stumbled backward, nearly falling. There was no time to run to the shed. He was too close. Her only chance was the cabin. She turned, slipping on the ice, dragging the duffel behind her. Her legs screamed, her lungs burned. The world narrowed to the sound of that thing crashing forward through the snow. She reached the porch. The rifle slipped from her glove and clattered across the steps. She dove for it, grabbing it by the barrel, turned and fired into the air. The crack split the frozen air. The bear stopped, blinking against the echo. Then, silence. He stared at her, eyes dark and unblinking. For a moment, neither moved. Martha could feel her knees shaking. She didn't know if she had the strength for another shot. The bear huffed once, a low, guttural sound, then lowered his head. He stepped forward again. Her finger tightened on the trigger. And then, from the duffel bag, the faintest sound, a cry, high, weak, the voice of his own blood. The cubs. The male froze. His head lifted. He listened. Something changed in his posture, the fury melting into something else. Recognition. He took one hesitant step closer, then stopped. His breath clouded in the air, slow, uncertain. Martha didn't move. She held her breath. The bear stood there for a long, impossible minute, watching her, listening to the cubs, before turning away. He lumbered back into the white, his massive body vanishing into the fog of snow. Martha collapsed against the door, sobbing from sheer exhaustion. She pulled the cubs out, both now awake, blinking up at her with wide, dark eyes. "It's okay," she whispered. "He's gone, you're safe." But outside, far beyond the ridge, the wind began to rise again, and this time it wasn't the storm she feared. It was the silence that came before it. The second storm hit before noon. No warning, no wind rising slowly this time. Just a sudden wall of white swallowing the world whole. By the time Martha realized what was happening, the sky had vanished, the cabin groaning under the weight of ice and wind. She moved fast. The cubs were restless, whining softly, sensing what she couldn't see. She threw more wood into the stove, though the pile was almost gone. Every log she burned was another hour she wouldn't survive if help didn't come. She hadn't slept in nearly 2 days. Her eyes burned. Her hands were raw and shaking, but the cubs, they were alive. That was all that mattered. When she touched their fur, warm and breathing, she felt a pulse of something she hadn't known in years. Purpose. Outside, the storm screamed like a living thing. The roof shuddered. Snow forced its way in through the cracks. The windows rattled so hard she thought they might shatter. And then came the sound she dreaded, the long, low creak of the roof beam. The cabin wasn't going to last. She looked at the cubs, both huddled together inside the blanket-lined basket. Then at the small door that led to the shed outside. The one with metal walls. The one that could hold. It meant going back into the storm, but if she stayed, the roof would bury them all. She didn't hesitate this time. She wrapped the cubs tight, tied the blanket around her shoulders like a sling, and opened the door. The wind hit like a slap. Snow blinded her instantly, clawing at her face. She pushed forward one step at a time, the weight of the cubs heavy against her chest. She couldn't see the shed, only guessed the direction from memory. Every few steps she stopped, gasping for air, her heartbeat loud in her ears. Halfway there, she stumbled, fell to her knees. The cold burned through her clothes like knives, her vision blurred. For a heartbeat, she thought of letting go, just resting, just for a moment. But then a sound rose from her chest. Soft, desperate whimpers. The cubs. She forced herself up. One step, then another. By the time she reached the shed door, her fingers were so numb she could barely turn the latch. She shoved it open with her shoulder, stumbled inside and kicked it shut. Silence. Thick and heavy. She collapsed to the floor, breath ragged, shaking uncontrollably. The cubs squirmed against her, still alive. She untied the blanket, pulled them close again, and held them beneath her coat. The air inside the shed was freezing, but it was shelter. She found an old lantern on the workbench, lit it, and the glow filled the small space with gold. Dust motes shimmered like fireflies in the light. Martha sat against the wall, listening to the storm hammer the metal walls. Her body ached, her skin burning from frostbite, but she didn't care. The cubs were pressed against her chest, tiny hearts beating steady now. She smiled weakly. "Your mama got you this far," she whispered. "Now it's my turn." Hours passed. The storm raged, but the shed held. At some point, exhaustion pulled her into a haze between waking and sleep. In that half-dream, she saw her son, 12 years old again, laughing in the snow, wearing the red scarf she'd knitted him the winter before he died. He turned, smiling. "You came back for them, Mum." Then he vanished into the light. She woke with tears frozen on her cheeks. The storm had gone silent. When she opened the door, dawn had broken again, a pale, pinkish light spreading across the horizon. The air was still. The world was quiet. The cabin roof had collapsed overnight. Only part of it remained, half buried under the snow. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney, but near the edge of the clearing, she saw movement. The male bear. He stood beside the body of the mother, sniffing the air, slow and deliberate. He nudged her once, then twice, as if trying to wake her. Then he sat beside her and looked toward the horizon. Not rage, not hunger, just stillness. Martha stayed where she was, breath caught in her throat. The cub stirred inside the blanket, letting out a faint cry. The male turned his head toward the sound. For a moment, the world froze. Then, slowly, the bear began to move, not toward her, but away. He walked into the open field, pausing once to look back. Martha understood. He wasn't leaving in anger. He was waiting. She stepped out into the snow, the cubs pressed close to her chest. The cold bit deep, but she barely felt it. She walked toward the open plain until the distance between them was just enough. Safety, but not separation. Then she stopped. Kneeling, she placed the cubs down in the snow. They whimpered softly, crawling toward the faint scent of their kin. The male watched. When the cubs reached him, he lowered his massive head and sniffed them both. One let out a squeak. The bear's breath clouded in the air, slow and deep. Then, with a sound almost like a sigh, he turned and began to walk, the cubs stumbling after him, disappearing into the rising light. Martha stood there long after they were gone. The silence of the tundra pressed around her, vast and endless. Her legs trembled, her hands burned with cold. But she didn't move. She couldn't. Something had shifted. In the air, in her chest, in the space that had been hollow for so long. She felt the ache of loss, yes, but also something else. Peace. By the time she returned to the cabin, her strength was almost gone. She sank onto the steps, looking out across the white horizon. The light was changing, gold now, soft against the snow. Her breath came slow, even. She closed her eyes. Somewhere far off, she thought she heard it again, a distant roar, faint, rolling across the wind. But it wasn't a threat this time. It sounded like goodbye. Martha smiled, and as the light touched her face, the world felt warm again, just for a moment. That night, no one saw the old woman or the cubs again. But weeks later, when rescuers reached the ruins of her cabin, they found one thing still burning, the lamp she'd left in the window. Its flame hadn't gone out. It had simply waited.